If you're anything like me, Amy's tragic story will leave you feeling heartbroken, angry, frightened, horrified, confused, and powerless. What we hope you do with all that emotion and energy is simply not turn away. We invite you to turn toward the issues of domestic violence, its complexity, its heartbreak, and its reality. We can't change what happened to Amy Holman McGee, as Detective Fischel said, or the thousands of victims killed by domestic violence. But we are not powerless to prevent this from happening to our friends, our neighbors, our sisters, mothers, loved ones, and to ourselves. I am joined by Cheryl Cates of the National Domestic Violence Hotline and a leading expert on the issue of domestic violence. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you, Mariska. Wow. When you see that video, it's just Amy's story is so heart-wrenching.
I think that when we watch a show, a documentary like we've just seen, and you think like, how did this happen? How could it have happened? And we feel so powerless, and how can we, as you said, empower ourselves? The way to empower ourselves is to talk about it. And we wish more people are talking about it, and that's the only way we'll ever be able to...
And believing that they can make a difference, right? I mean, if I know someone or have a friend, a family member, or a coworker, and say, I want to help, or how can I help?
I remember when I was first doing my research for SVU, and I went through some crisis training, and I learned the statistics, and I was just dumbfounded. If people knew them, then everyone would be talking about it, because it's true that it affects all of us. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that 1 in 4 women
1 in 4.
will... Yes.
Which means that if you're at lunch with 4 girlfriends,
Yes.
1 in 4, or you're at a baby shower and you look around the room at 20 women and you say, if that statistic is the truth in this room, what does that mean?
And I looked at, in my own family where we have 4 girls, and one of my sisters has been abused. And I think that statistic comes alive at that moment. It's not just someone else. It's my family, it's your family. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, any race, any age, sexual orientation, religion, gender. It also can happen across all socioeconomic backgrounds and education levels. There's often a question about men. Are men abused as well? And yes, they are. But the vast majority, 85%, are females.
What is the impact of a child growing up in a violent household?
When they're exposed to violence in the home, I think children, it has a profound impact on them. And we know that, there's 3.3 million children who are affected by domestic violence. So
before we get into those statistics, may I ask you, just for clarity, what is exactly domestic violence? Can you tell us, really define it for us about what it is?
Well, it's a pattern of behavior where someone uses power and control in any relationship and against their intimate partner. It's physical, it's emotional, it's sexual, it's psychological, it's economic. It may be where someone actually threatens and terrorizes another person and creating...
I just want to stop you for 1 second, because I think that's something that people need to hear. If somebody threatens you or intimidates you or uses a weapon or touches you in an unsafe way, that is abuse.
Right.
That is not normal behavior. And if somebody is treating you like that, even though you're used to it, it's not okay.
Right.
And it's not normal, and it needs to change. And we urge you to tell someone.
And we do want them to tell someone. I mean, if they can, there are shelters all across this country, and they do such wonderful work. And they're here 24/7. They are here to do counseling and legal services and create an environment for their lives to change, for hope to happen. And they do an amazing amount of advocacy on behalf of the victim and make sure that they're safe.
Well, another thing that I hear over and over from survivors of abuse, domestic violence, the fact is they feel alone because of the shame and the guilt.
And they need to know they're not alone.
They're not alone.
And they're not alone.
And the 1 in 4 statistic proves that.
Right. And I think one of the things that we again tell them is that reaching out to someone for help is critical. We know that oftentimes it takes a tremendous amount of courage. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to reach out and make that first phone call.
And they feel that it is their fault, which it is so not. And I think it's so important to be non-judgmental about it. And I think it's hard for people because they don't understand it. And there does seem to be a lot of judgment toward the victim. Why didn't they just leave? Why are they still staying in a relationship? I would never put up with that if somebody was treating me that. And I just get that question over and over. Why doesn't she just leave? And I think so many times it's women that truly feel that they do not have an option, and that is why they stay, especially if they're financially dependent on the husband. How are they going to care for the children? How are they going to eat? But I want to ask the question this way, not why didn't she leave, but why does the abuser choose to abuse?
And, I have a story for that in terms of what I've heard from men who perpetrate violence. And I actually was in a class with a man who was talking about what he had done to his partner, where he had actually taken her head and put it into a bureau or a dresser. And he said, I can do this. I have the right to do it. And it works. When I tell her to shut up, she now shuts up. And also, he said, and there's no consequences. And that to me was one of those moments where I thought to myself that we have to change that thinking of a person who is perpetrating violence, that they can't do that. We're not going to tolerate this. We are not going to allow this to continue. We're not going to keep blaming victims because they want the violence to stop.
And they love the person. They want the abuse to stop. They don't want the relationship to stop.
I've even heard people say they deserve what they get.
Oh, I don't even know how to respond to that.
So that's something I wanted them to say is that, we as community members can step in and make a difference. Mm-hmm. And even if they don't leave, let's try to reserve our judgment so that we can respect their decisions and the timing that they have, because they know more than we will ever know. It's not an easy answer, but there is, I think, an answer for communities to be more involved, get more educated, be a listening ear, think about ways that you could have made a difference in Amy's story. It's simple. It's reaching out. In terms of the other day, I was at a picking up my clothes at the cleaners and seeing a woman with a black eye and 4 marks on her arm, and just taking a moment to let her know that if there's somewhere you need to go, I have a 1-800 number, and there's someone who can help you there. We as a community member have to say that if my neighbor is abusing their spouse or their loved one or intimate partner, that we have an opportunity to make that call to the police department, or to say, hey, I heard something going on last night and I'm not okay with this.
Well,
I'm worried.
I wanted to ask you about that. I think that is such a difficult thing for people that they're so scared of. I mean, if you suspect something that is going on with friends of yours, right? And you're close with the husband and you think he's a great guy, but you've noticed that he's being disrespectful, or he yells at her, or he threatens her in public, and then you say to yourself, well, if he's doing that in front of us, what is he doing when they're alone? So how can people... people are scared. What if they're wrong? What if I'm right? Who am I to get involved? It's not my business.
But it is our business. It makes our neighborhoods unsafe. It makes our families and our homes unsafe. So I think that's important that we take the opportunity to say something. If nothing else, give a card of here's where you might can get some help, or is there some things going on in your relationship that I'm here for you to talk, or when you're ready, I'm here for you. And I'm telling you, they will come back to you. They will see you, that you've heard them, that you're not leaving them alone, that they can trust you with these most vile secrets sometimes, where they've been not only physically abused, emotionally abused, psychologically abused, and sexually abused. And when that all happens to you and you're trying to decide, am I going to leave, am I going to stay, can I trust this person with my life? Because this person who is my intimate partner who says they love me, is the one that's hurting me the most.
And how can they trust anyone, what you just said? If the person who says, I love you, if the person who they're supposed to trust the most and garner that support and love from, is betraying them, how confusing. That's like getting the rug pulled out from you every day. I mean, just in watching, the movie, and I know I keep going back to this word complexity, but I just find it so key, because when you're watching the movie and the way Vince wanted to drive her to work and everything, at first you're thinking, oh, that is so sweet at the beginning. And especially imagine, a young girl that has never had this kind of attention before, and he wants to be with her every second, but she works, so he thinks,
it's actually controlling behavior.
I always say to young girls I meet to trust their gut, to trust that intuition, and if ever they're in a situation when they don't feel safe, get out.
Absolutely. And I think that those are great words. See, you just said it. This is what a community member can do. This is what each one of us can do.
You're saying the most important thing is for us to acknowledge them, to remind them about their strength, to listen to them, let them know that the abuse is not their fault.
And not okay.
And not okay.
We can make this happen together. We can prevent domestic violence. We can stop it.
I remember a participant on one of our programs for the Joyful Heart Foundation trip once said that it was her first time that her body didn't feel like a crime scene. And I just remember how that stuck with me, and I thought, nobody should ever feel like that. So I have the same ambition for all women who are being abused. What can we do collectively to solve this?
As members of the public, we can donate our time and our energy in terms of volunteering, knowing what your public officials think about this issue. What do they vote on this issue? That is critical. And be sure you know the resources in your community. There may be many options for a person. It may be in a faith-based organization. It may be a shelter provider. Have a conversation. Begin the dialogue. See it as a process, too. We aren't going to be perfect. You don't have to be the perfect expert on domestic violence. You can do just encouraging words. It's that simple, but begin the dialogue. If you see that your friends or neighbors or coworkers are involved in violence, have something to say, or have a card to give them, or a brochure. It may be that it's a call to a hotline, a 1-800 number like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Say there's no more excuse. There's not an excuse. We are not going to tolerate violence. We are not going to be a part of sitting in silence, because our silence can be just as powerful as approval. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about an abuser who says, I can, and there's no consequences.
There are consequences.
We need to make sure that a part of our community response
That way.
is that there is accountability. Domestic violence is a crime all
Period.
across this country.
Yeah.
And
I
we have
think
to treat it as one.
It is so important when we talk about domestic violence. We're not talking about men versus women or women versus men. We're talking about violence versus peace.
That's right.
We're talking about control versus respect.
That's right. And I think that's what we need to look at, is how can we change that conversation to being, it isn't about men versus women, but it is about peace.
All right.
Thank
you.
I'm forward.
We're both going to cry. But thank you, Cheryl, so much for being here today. I feel nourished and encouraged and armed with some tools, and I really appreciate it. God bless. Thank you for joining us. I'm so proud to be part of a movement that will change the way we talk about and behave around the epidemic of domestic violence. For so many victims, their safety and their path to healing begins with and continues to be affected by the response of the community. We envision a community that is strong enough not to turn away. We envision a community that says to a survivor, we hear you, we believe you, you are not alone, and your healing is our priority. This film can serve as an important tool to bring communities together to talk about domestic violence. Our hope is that you will feel empowered to share Amy's story, to foster further conversations, and to reach out to others. While we will never be able to change the ending to Amy's story, We hope that its telling can change outcomes for the millions of victims, survivors, and loved ones affected by domestic violence every day.